Hey guys, welcome back to Falcons Central Radio Show on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I'm one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman, joined by my co-host Scott Karasik. We are back this week to talk about the Falcons' impending free agent visit with Earl Mitchell, the defensive tackle. We'll do our roster review. This week we'll be talking about the offensive line, as well as the defensive line and the edge players. And we'll be answering you guys' mailbag questions at the end of the show and also throughout the show. So, Scott, let's talk about the reports that Earl Mitchell is visiting the team this week. He was cut by the Dolphins last week. A couple of years in Miami after several years in Houston. Solid defensive tackle, but never has really sort of lived up to the billing of being one of those difference makers on the interior. What are your thoughts on the possibility of the Falcons signing him?
I mean, I'd be okay with it. Earl Mitchell's been a solid defensive tackle no matter where he's gone as a one tech or even a three tech at times. I think adding him to a rotation isn't going to kill anything. And I think if you put him in the middle with Hageman and Jarrett, that only helps the defense. I mean, I know you're sitting here thinking Hageman shouldn't be someone you rely on, because we've had this talk before, but if you put Mitchell and rotate him and Hageman and Jarrett, and you hope that Bryant Young can be that coach that says, you know what, Rashid, this is what I used to do to be great. Just do what I used to do, and you can also be great. And, just helps Jarrett continue to refine. And I think the Falcons will be fine in the middle as long as they also add a developmental player in the draft along the lines of like a Chris Wormley in the second round, as early as the second round, or even someone a little bit later like a Jerron Jones, a Devon Godchaux out of Louisiana State, even a Charles Walker or Jeremiah Ledbetter.
Yeah, no, my thing with Hageman is not that I think he's incapable. I just don't think it's a smart bet to put all your eggs in that basket and sort of making the assumption that he's going to go from where he is today, which has been a pretty good rotational player down the stretch, to being a guy that can be sort of your number two beside Grady Jarrett for an entire season. I think that's why going out and getting somebody like an Earl Mitchell is a smart move for the Falcons. It gives you an insurance policy in case Hageman's not ready to make that step. And, I don't think Earl Mitchell is going to cost a ton, but, he probably get paid at least a modest starter's contract at the very minimum. So I don't feel like you're going out there and you're spending $40 million or anything like that, but you could probably get him for 15 or 20 or something like that over three or 4 years or whatever. And I think that's a solid start for your offseason in terms of getting a D tackle that can sort of, it seems like Mitchell has been more of a one technique throughout his career than a three, but he can play three. I think if that's the plan, then you go with Grady Jarrett at that three tech, and then you sort of mix in Hageman and whoever else you add this offseason. Again, as you say, Scott, probably a draft pick that you can just sort of develop long term into the mix. And then it's not, it doesn't make you go from, one of the league's weaker D tackle groups to one of the best, but it certainly is an upgrade and sort of solidifies that area. So I wouldn't be against the move at all. So let me ask you this, Scott. If you do go out and you sign Earl Mitchell, do you feel like the Falcons are going to make a play for any of the major D tackles come free agency, or is this essentially, if they were to sign Earl Mitchell, this is their big free agent move at D tackle?
I mean, I think you might see Courtney Upshaw come back. I think if they do go out and get someone like Mitchell and they're like, you know what, Upshaw can play in and out. I do think you'll see someone like maybe Dwight Freeney get re-signed on the edge. Outside of that, unless Babineau's coming back too, I don't really see anything huge. Again, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they shouldn't do something big at defensive tackle. I just think they're like, you know what? We've got Shelby that we paid for. We can get Mitchell. We can get, if they get Shelby, Mitchell, Jarrett, and Hageman, they're like, you know what? This is what we want to roll with going into the draft. And then in the draft, they get someone in like the 3rd or 4th round. And they're like, you know what? This guy's got potential. We'll teach him up. And, if Upshaw ends up being good and Shelby ends up being good, one of them can move to end, full time. But outside of that, like, I don't see a reason at all to even sit there and think, oh, yeah, the Falcons are going to go super high money on their defensive tackles if they like Hageman and Jarrett and see Hageman's role increasing next year, like what's been reported by LaFleur. I don't see them going out and spending a high pick on him on a replacement for, Babineau or Hageman when they're like, well, we like Hageman. So.
Gotcha. Okay, let's move on to the roster review, and we'll touch upon a little bit more on the defensive line a little later. But let's start things off by talking about the offensive line. For the most part, most of the players are coming back. 4 of the 5 starters are under contract. Most of the backups, including guys like Wes Schweitzer and a bunch of guys that were on the practice squad, Trevor Robinson, Blake Murr, whatever.
I know it's weird. I actually had to look it up.
Carter Bykowski and Kevin Graff. Ben Garland is an exclusive rights free agent, so he, presumably he will be also in the mix as well. So that does leave the uncertain statuses of Chris Chester and Tom Compton, both unrestricted free agents, up in the air. I'm curious, Scott, do you think either one of those guys comes back this year?
Depends on their money. I know Garland's coming back. Just because Garland's cheap, you're not going to not bring back Garland. And he's a restricted free agent, not an exclusive rights guy. But I could see him agreeing to a way smaller deal with Atlanta before the deadline. And then Compton, depending on the money, I think Compton could come back pretty cheaply as well. He signed a 1 year, $1 million contract. I could see Atlanta bringing him back for that. Or worst case scenario, he goes to San Francisco for a little bit more. And then Chris Chester, I want him to be gone. I know your thing is if he comes back for a 1 year deal, it's not that bad. But he's been getting progressively worse in pass protection year after year after year. I went back and watched him just with a keen eye and was like, no, this guy, I don't want him. I don't want him protecting Matt Ryan next year. And not at 34 years old with how he played the last 2 years. And I would rather throw out Ben Garland, I'll put it that way. I'd rather re-sign Ben Garland and throw him in the starting role than have Chris Chester out there next year.
Okay. Yeah, I think Chris Chester is not nearly as bad as you think. I think his issues in pass protection tend to come when he's facing players like Gerald McCoy and Fletcher Cox more so than, your average NFL starter. Obviously, I do think the Falcons
issue in the Super Bowl containing the strength of Trey Flowers.
Well, he wasn't the only one who had trouble blocking Trey Flowers, so I wouldn't pin that all on him.
I'll pin it on him for missing the block in the key spot in the game.
Well,
if we're going to get worse.
Well, if we're going to play the blame game, you could pin a lot of stuff on Jake Matthews. You could pin a lot of stuff on Alex Mack. You could pin a lot of stuff on Ryan Schrader as well in that game. So, I feel like you're singling out Chris Chester a little bit unfairly as if he was somehow a massive liability in that game. And I think no one who watched that game would think he was anywhere close to the biggest problem on the offensive line in that week. But that being said, I do think the Falcons can upgrade over Chris Chester. I don't think it's going to be as easy as probably people assume it's going to be. Because I do think
the pass blocking side of things.
We'll see. I think I think he's underrated across the board. But yeah, I would not expect the Falcons to re-sign him. As for Compton, I think, you're probably right. They probably offer him a 1-year deal similar to what they gave him last year. Whether he takes that, I'm sure there will be other teams, potentially a team like San Francisco, that offer similar deals to him. So we'll see how that goes. But I do think the Falcons could certainly use some help supplementing their depth on the offensive line at offensive tackle, and possibly, I think guard is going to be not necessarily a need, but I do think it will be a position that they will address this offseason at some point. I do expect the Falcons to sort of take the stance of between Garland and Schweitzer, that they don't have this massive hole at right guard that I think a lot of people are expecting them to think that way. I think they just probably go with somebody in the draft to build for the future, as opposed to going out and spending this big contract on someone like Ronald Leary or Kevin Zeitler or any of the other top guards in free agency this year.
I'll agree there, but I'll also throw in the caveat that if Dan Feeney is available in the first round at their pick, or if, Forrest Lamp or Dorian Johnson are there in the second round for their pick, or even Louisiana State center Ethan Pocic, if he's available in the third round at their third round pick, I mean, those are three guys that I watch them and I go, man, I'd love to see him in Atlanta at right guard. Between Dorian Johnson and Feeney and Pocic, I think all three of those guys could sit in right next to Mac and be upgrades in pass pro and be about the same in run blocking once they finally made that transition to the NFL effectively. And I think being between a guy like Mac and a guy like Ryan Schrader right next to you isn't going to hurt you. You've got a top 5 center and you've got a top 6-7 right guard at minimum right next to you. And then, you just have to do your job and you'll be fine. So I think Atlanta might do something like that. Take one of those guys in those first 3 rounds. And then after those first 3 rounds, just looking at guys that that guy's a depth guy. So, saying, hey, Connor McDermott from UCLA, he may not be the perfect fit in every scheme because he's kind of light for, an outside tackle at 305. But Atlanta might be like, you know what? He's quick on his feet. He's got good footwork. He delivers a solid enough punch. We need a swing tackle. He's sitting here in the 5th, 6th round. Let's take him.
It's an option. Let's switch sides and let's talk about the defensive line. Now, Scott wanted me to break this up into D-line versus edge. So hopefully he agrees with my sort of distinctions here. Talking about the D-line, we're talking more about
changing one real quick.
Okay. I figured one of these guys would be potentially.
Yeah, just looking at this. And then I don't know if Fetty, but I think Fetty's just not that good, so it won't really matter in the end. But Fetty sucks, if we're being honest. But
so in the D-line group,
no, he's a D-line. He's not an edge.
Okay. So behind the scenes, our edge group is so small that there's really no point making the distinction at this point. But
there is. It's important to make the distinction between edge and D-line because there's different roles.
Okay. I don't know. That's like making the distinction between kicker and punter. It seems like they deserve to be put in it, but that's something we'll discuss off air, I guess.
Defensive line guys play with their hand in the dirt at all times. Edge guys you can use as linebackers as well sometimes. That's my distinction.
Okay. I get the distinction, but one is so small a group of guys that I don't understand why we're separating them. But fine, it's fine.
Talent there.
D-line, we have Grady Jarrett, Rashid Hageman, Adrian Claiborne, Tyson Jackson, Derek Shelby, Joe Villano, Jimmy Staten, and Martin Affetti. Those are all the guys that are currently under contract for the Falcons. Free agents, we have Jonathan Babineau and Courtney Upshaw. As you can tell, there's a couple other guys that we did not mention, but we'll get to those in the edge group. So this is probably the position that has the most potential for shakeup, because Babineau and Upshaw, key role players, both free agents. The expectation is Tyson Jackson's probably going to be a strong possibility to be a cap cut. You have Claiborne, who's dealing with his bicep injury, might miss most of, if not all of the offseason. You have Shelby coming off an Achilles injury. Even if he comes back, who knows what type of player he's going to be. You still have Hageman with his sort of off-field situation sort of looming over his head, and whether or not, that's going to affect his status moving forward. So you're really looking at this position, and the only player that you can say with 100% certainty that the Falcons can count on next year is Grady Jarrett. And outside of that, there's room for significant change here. So, Scott, I'm curious where you think the Falcons sort of jump off point with trying to upgrade or address this D-line group.
I mean, between Jarrett and Hageman, I think those are the two guys that I would say are guaranteed roster spots, maybe even Claiborne. Outside of that, I don't know if all those guys are even going to make the roster. Derek Shelby might even get an injury settlement if they decide to cut him a little early. I mean, if you can get rid of Shelby and Jackson, and we'll get to this later, but Brooks Reed, and bring in a guy like JPP with the money that you'd save from those guys' contracts for at least the first 3 years, why wouldn't you do it?
Well, I don't think Shelby can be cut because his contract is guaranteed for injury, which he is injured. So pretty much
that's what I'm saying, an injury settlement, because it's guaranteed for injury. But if they cut him before the third league day and they come with an injury settlement for that guaranteed money, then they should be okay to cut him and he wouldn't be on the team anymore. But they could always bring him back later on.
I don't know if they can do that, but I'd have to look it up. Yeah, I would expect Shelby to be back. I would be very surprised if the Falcons got rid of him. Everyone else, I think, is sort of up in the air a little bit. I think Claiborne should be back, but I think there's like a 2% chance he gets cut. I think, again, with Hageman, I think he should come back, but at the same time, if whatever his off-field situation is goes the wrong way and he gets convicted of domestic violence, I think there's like a 0% chance that Arthur Blank is going to keep a guy that's got a domestic violence charge on his rap sheet or convicted of domestic violence. So I don't agree quite yet that his status is completely settled. I do think if that all goes away or whatever, he gets, not guilty or whatever it is, or, he pleads out or whatever, then he probably is safe. But I don't quite know to the same degree. I'm not as confident as everybody else seems to be that Hageman is definitely going to be on the roster opening day because of that, but we'll see. So, I mean, for me, that's one of the reasons why this position is so critical and why a guy like Earl Mitchell, I think, could be an option for the Falcons or somebody else's upcoming season. Even though I think Shelby's roster spot is safe, I don't know how valuable he can be coming off an Achilles injury. Not everybody is Cameron Wake and can just sort of come right back from that. And I feel like if the Falcons are smart, they're looking for someone at D tackle that can play beside Grady Jarrett as a potential starter over Hageman. And they're looking at another sort of inside-outside guy that can play that sort of Shelby role if need be, if he's not a factor this year. Someone like a Jabal Sheard or somebody like that, I think sort of could be an option there. And there's a multitude of potential D tackle free agents. Mitchell's one. Jared Odrick is another one. Jonathan Hankins, Stephen Paya, Chris Baker. Trying to think of who else. Benny Logan. So yeah, I think a lot of those guys are sort of guys that should be on the Falcons' radar if they're looking to make an upgrade at that spot if they don't wind up getting Mitchell. Upshaw, I expect should be back, but I also think teams will be after him. There will be a certain amount of teams that will be willing to offer him a decent contract. And so I don't necessarily know if Atlanta's going to value him as much as other teams might. But we'll see how that goes. I think because of the uncertainty of several of these players, it's probably, Upshaw probably moves a little bit more to the top of the priority list. But I also don't necessarily know if that means the Falcons are going to go out of the way to pay him a huge deal in the end. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, my boy Jonathan Babineau, I don't expect him to be back. Like that to me would happen if he basically decides he's going to keep playing and the Falcons don't hit on the free agents that they want to hit on at D tackle, and come like middle of April, they're like, hey, let's give Babineau a holler, or maybe even after the draft, if they don't get the pick that they want. And then they say, let's just give him a 1-year minimum deal. And similar to what they did with Chester after the draft last year. Like that's probably the only chance I would see Babineau coming back in Atlanta. But, I hope I'm wrong. I would certainly love to see him back for one more year.
Because he's your favorite player.
Yes, he is.
Like, by far, he is your favorite player.
It's my boy. Yeah, I mean, like it's a lot of question marks at this spot, and I think if you're the Falcons position where you feel like we could, like, this is an offseason where the Falcons could only make one major move here, and that could be a free agent, that could be a high draft pick, or they might make like 5 moves here, not like all big splashes or anything, but just like they just completely revamp this unit, and we see a whole bunch of new faces in there headed into next year. So I think there's certainly a possibility for either one of those outcomes, and I would certainly love to see the Falcons be aggressive and really try to reshape this position to make it a strength, to go from what was widely conceived to be one of the team's bigger weaknesses last year to what could potentially be one of their biggest strengths this year.
Yeah.
Got anything else to say about this group before we move on to the – oh, wait, we do have a question. I kind of answered it, but I'll get your thoughts on it, Scott. Evan Birchfield asks, what impact do you think getting Shelby back will have?
Ooh, depends on how healthy he is. It could be a Corey Peters situation where he's solid for like 8 weeks after a Achilles injury, or it could be a situation where like he just never looks the same. And I mean, in that situation, what are you gonna do? Like I don't think he's gonna have this huge impact. I'm leaning more towards he's not gonna do well, and Atlanta may have to cut him in camp and come up with an injury settlement.
Yeah, for me, it's one of those things where like history sort of tells us that players coming back from their Achilles injury are okay in moderation, but shouldn't be expected to have huge roles. We saw with Peters in 2014, he was a solid like 4th guy in our D tackle rotation, but really didn't sort of command more reps than that. We certainly can debate whether or not he should have gotten more in light of guys like Jackson and Soliai getting a bunch of reps that year. We saw the same year or the year before or whenever it was with Croy Bierman coming back from his Achilles tear, and everybody basically crying about how much playing time Croy Bierman was getting in the first half of the season. He sort of turned it on in the second half of the season, was probably like our second or third best D lineman over the last 8 or so games. but that first half of the season probably should have been brought along a little bit more slowly than he probably was. So you can imagine a situation where Shelby's in the same boat. We've seen with Sean Weatherspoon, even though this wasn't in Atlanta, that year in Arizona, he was not a full-time starter for them coming back from his Achilles injury. So history sort of says when Falcon players get Achilles tears, you can't really put too much stock in them, but we'll see. Maybe Shelby's different. All right, let's talk about the edge players, this very small group of players. On the roster we have right now is Vic Beasley and Brooks Reed. In free agencies, we have Dwight Freeney, and we also have Tyler Starr, who is exclusive rights free agent, so technically we can probably put him on the roster as well. So I guess the first question to answer this offseason, Scott, is Freeney going to retire? Is he coming back?
I don't know. I hope he gives Atlanta one more shot and comes back one more year. I'd love to have Vic Beasley and Freeney as the main guys you're building around on the edge, and find a guy like JPP or Melvin Ingram and add them to those guys. I know Aaron probably wants someone from the draft as opposed to someone from free agency, but I think Atlanta needs to go out and get a guy who's ready now, not a guy who's going to take 3 years to develop for that main spot in the rotation. To where you have Beasley and that guy, and then you bring in, Dwight Freeney on third down every now and again. Then you bring in, whoever you might draft in the mid to late rounds to get some snaps at times. But I think Beasley and Freeney are the guys you have to make sure you have, and I think you have to go out and get a guy. And I think Ingram or JPP, those guys are never available in free agency, ever. Ingram might be the best outside pass rush free agent in a long time. And that's if he hits the open market in 2 weeks now? I don't know if either of those guys are even really going to hit the open market. But if they do, you can't let them get the free, or you can't let them get past the Falcons. I mean, I almost wish Chandler Jones would be available because I'd love to see Chandler Jones here in Atlanta too. But I don't think there's any way that Arizona doesn't franchise him.
Well, all the reports say that that's their plan, so I'm going to assume that those reports are right. I think JPP, I think the time to sign JPP, in my personal opinion, was last year when you could buy low on him. And I think now this year, because of the Vernon contract and because the season that he had, which was pretty good, not amazing by any means, but certainly in line with sort of a normal JPP season. So any questions that people had that hand was going to be a major limiting factor, that question was mostly answered this year. I just feel like at this point, he's going to price himself out of where I would like to pay for him. It's not to say that he's not a good player, but unless you're getting him for, 35-ish million or something like that, I just feel like that's going to be too much for what he's probably going to want, given, Vernon just got 85 million from the Giants last year. I'm assuming JPP is going to want a similar deal. He probably won't get it, but I think he'll be able to maximize his salary this year. Ingram is going to be interesting because, for the most part, people have been talking about him as this sort of under the radar sort of free agent, but I feel like because of all the hype that he's getting, which I think is deserved, but I don't think he's going to be this sort of mid-level signing that people sort of think he's going to be. And I think he's also going to be in that Vernon price range.
I'd pay him that too.
I wouldn't pay anybody Olivier Vernon money unless their name is Von Miller or Khalil Mack or Justin Hughes. That's just too much money. I wouldn't pay that. 85 million, 40 million guaranteed. You have to be an elite pass rusher. You got to be the Desmond Trufant of pass rushers. And I don't think Ingram's on that level. I think he's good, but I don't think he's that good. Yeah, so like I don't know. Like for me, it's one of those things where like I feel like the Falcons should draft a guy, whether they sign somebody or not. I just feel like it's people in class, an edge class to not come away with somebody that you can develop for the future. Whether that means you still go out and get somebody in free agency, that's that's whatever. But like I just feel like the Falcons have done a poor job in recent history of drafting when rosters are positions are strong. Like last year, we took a tight end in a weak tight end class. This year, it's a strong tight end class. Well, we take a tight end. Last year was a very strong D tackle class. We didn't take a D tackle. This year, we're going to take a D tackle in what is a weaker D tackle class. Last year, or this year is a really strong D end class. We had the really strong wide receiver classes back-to-back years, and the Falcons sort of avoided wide receiver in those years. And it's just one of those things where, like, if there's a position of strength, you'd like to attack that, at least from my perspective. And the Falcons, I don't think have done that quite well. People say it's a weak offensive line class, and everybody expects the Falcons to draft an offensive lineman this year. So it just seems to be like at some point they have to be able to match up strength for strength. So like that's why I feel like they should take a DN in the draft, regardless of what they do in free agency.
So if they go like DN, defensive lineman, tight end in the first 3 rounds, because that's basically attacking the strength.
Yeah, that would be sort of where I would want to see them go. You could even throw safety in the mix there.
Wait, you're talking about getting a safety in the first 3 rounds?
I haven't been opposed to it. I just think my whole issue was the idea that people thought it was a necessary pick, that we couldn't become a better defense without upgrading from Ricardo Allen. That was the point I was trying to make all year long. It wasn't that we couldn't upgrade from Ricardo Allen. It was just people acted like it was this massive need, and it wasn't.
So that's where I kind of want to go next week when we do talk about the safeties. Can you remember to put on the checklist the Jabril Peppers question?
Okay.
Because that's one thing I do want to talk about.
Okay. I think we answered Evan's question about what will happen to Dwight Freeney. I think he's going to retire. That's what I think. But if I'm putting my money on it, I would bet on him retiring.
And I'm going to hope that Aaron's wrong. And Freeney says, you know what? I just want to come back for one more year. I'm fine. I'll be done after this. This is my tour. Atlanta gives him $2 million instead of $1 million. Whoop you fucking do. And everybody's happy. Like, I think Freeney does come back. I'm gonna put money that Freeney comes back. Says one more run. Let me keep having my old man days, and we'll be good.
Well, no offense to Dwight Freeney, who is one of my favorite players. I hope the Falcons upgrade that spot enough that by the time Freeney makes his decision, which I'm assuming is going to be in May, on whether he wants to come back or not, the Falcons will be like, yeah, we're good. We've already invested in our defensive end group, so there's really no point bringing you back. We only brought you in last year because we basically ignored our defensive end spot in the offseason. And I hope that's not the case again this year. So, I wish Dwight Freeney the best, but hopefully I hope it's not really an option. Okay, let's get into these mailbag questions. All right. First one comes from Joshua Haymond from @Wispa2000. He asks, should the Falcons go after Paul Soliai in free agency to help with the run defense?
God, no. Just absolutely not.
My answer would be no, but I will say this. It's only because Paul Soliai tends to get paid more than what he's worth. And I don't like if you could get Paul Soliai like on a 1-year, $1 million deal, it would be worth it to me. But because he always seems to be playing for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 million, as opposed to that, No, I would probably pass on it.
Let's put it this way. If we could all have David Cantor negotiate our contracts at our jobs, we would all be very happy men because we would all be paid about a Ford multiple on what we're actually making right now.
There you go. Luke at the Dirty Bird 1998 asks, thoughts on a possible Sharif Floyd reunion? He was an All-American under Quinn and Young in 2012.
When would they do this? Sharif Floyd's not a free agent until 2018. I can't see Atlanta.
He is being talked about as a possible cap cut by the Vikings this year.
Really?
Yeah.
If they're dumb enough to do that, go in and scoop them up. Because Sharif Floyd could be monstrous in this defense.
I would not expect the Vikings to cut him outright. I know he's dealt with some injury issues, and I know Mike Zimmer, when asked about Sharif Floyd mid-season, was pretty down on him. But like, I think the issue with Sharif Floyd is he has a fifth-year option this year, and that's guaranteed for injury. And so in order for the Vikings it to be worth it for them to like trade him or something like that, he would have to prove that he's healthy coming back from his knee injury before the offseason starts, before the league year kicks in, because then his contract becomes guaranteed. And then at that point, you can only really trade him. And then the Falcons would have to sign off on his knee injury. I don't know. It's a lot of moving parts, basically the point I'm trying to make. So I would be for it. I think Sharif Floyd is a talented player that hasn't quite lived up to his billing in Minnesota, but I think we've seen flashes of being a top 15, top 20 D tackle when he's been healthy. That's the main concern. But yeah, if you could get him for like a fourth or fifth round pick in a trade or something like that, I think it's worth it.
Yeah, and he's only going to be 25 years old this season. So a 6'3", 311-pound guy who can play the 1 or the 3, to me that sounds like a guy I want on my team. And if he's only 25 years old, invest the 4th round pick, sign him to an extension, and that's your defensive line signing for the year. Like, that's worth it.
There you go. All right. Next question comes from Luke. He asks, could Elvis Dumervil be a decent value signing if we don't make any splash moves?
If Dumervil will take a deal late in the offseason and Atlanta hasn't signed anybody, but they draft a guy like, I don't know, Charles Harris that Aaron may not love, but a guy like me would be like, yeah, that's a good sign. That's a good pick.
I like Charles Harris.
You said no more 240-pound ends. He's 250 pounds.
He's like 250-ish.
Yeah, like you said no small edge. I say I don't give a fuck about what you think on that. Like, give me 250-pound guys, and let's just see Quinn go out, have him out there. Like, put Bruce Irvin and Cliff Avril out there, and what happens? They're both 250 pounds. So, like, I don't get you sometimes, man. But, yeah, I would love to get Elvis Dumervil. He is one of my favorite players of all time. He was one of my favorites when he was back at Louisville. He's one of my favorites when he was with the Broncos. He's been one of my favorites since he was with the Ravens. Like, I'm all for bringing in Elvis Dumervil, and I almost wish they would have brought him in. I don't even almost. They should have brought him in when the Broncos did that stupid shit with the fax machine and Dumervil was cut by the Broncos. Atlanta should have been like, you know what, Elvis? Come here. You're going to start tomorrow.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be for Dumervil, decent value signing. I mean, if you can get him on a similar deal that we got Freeney somewhere in that 1 year, $2 to $4 million range, that's worthwhile to sort of bring him in to basically take over for Freeney's job as a nickel pass rusher. Yeah, so I'd be for that. Andy at Falcons Andy asks, what's more important this offseason, becoming excellent versus the run or pass?
Coming excellent against the pass, I would say, because the NFL is a passing league. I mean, obviously you want to be solid against the run, but if Atlanta allowed like 3.8 yards per carry versus if they allowed 4 yards per carry even versus the 4.5 they allowed this past year, that's where I'd be happy. Like, improve in run defense. You're not going to be great in 1 year. And I'd rather get faster, quicker guys and have a better pass rush and have guys who can pass rush and, somewhat stop the run versus guys who are like, let's only stop the run. So I think it's much easier to get better versus the pass. You get back Desmond Trufant. You have 4 solid corners. You've got 2 solid safeties. You've got 2 linebackers who can cover. You really just need pass rushers. So go out and get pass rushers. Like, it's easier to become excellent versus the pass than it is versus the run. Now, the only thing is Atlanta does play some teams that are better in their run game next year.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think you want to be better against the pass, but I also think you can't just go all in on let's become a better pass defense, because I think for the most part the Falcons' pass defense is fine. I think their bigger issue is like they can't stop the run, and I think that's going to be a much bigger issue in 2017 than it was in 2016, largely because I think you're playing some teams like Dallas who are more than capable of pounding the ball down your throat. You also have teams like Miami who are definitely committed to the running game. I also think the offense, the step back that is most likely to happen for the offense is that they won't be getting out to these early 24-3 leads as consistently as they were this past season. So teams who are going to be able to not sort of abandon the run midway through the second quarter, as we saw often was the case down the stretch of the season. I don't think you're going to be able to count on that happening 2 years in a row. So I feel like there are going to be a lot more teams that are going to be able to run the ball later in the game, and that's going to potentially expose our run defense a lot more. So I do feel like you can't just go all in on one or the other. I think what you want to do is you want to find guys that are equally good against stopping the run and stopping the pass. That's obviously easier said than done, but I think you want to get pass rushers that you also can trust on rundowns, or say run defenders that you are comfortable with rushing the quarterback. That's sort of what's missing with the Falcons. They have too many guys that are really good at rushing the quarterback, but really suck against the run, like Freeney and Beasley and those guys like that. And then you have too many guys that are relatively solid run defenders, but really can't create any sort of reliable pressure. And that's pretty much everybody else on the defensive line roster. So, I feel like you got to get more guys that are like, the goal is to get Fletcher Cox type of players. That's obviously easier said than done, but that's what you want. So I don't feel like it's one or the other. It's kind of both. Okay. Joseph Harris at Broseph929 asks, thoughts about taco, not the food.
Talking about Taco Charlton.
I would assume so, unless he knows another taco from the league or something.
Taco Charlton is a very, very, very good football player. He is a very talented first-round talent. I like him as a defensive end in the idea of like a Carlos Dunlap. That's kind of who he reminds me of when I watch him play. But I would like to see him play a little bit inside in the NFL at the 3 and some pass rush situations. But I do like Taco Charlton. He's very good. He's probably, if you're looking for that more powerful, strong side defensive end who can also pass rush, Charlton's probably the guy you're talking about. that Michael Bennett role, that's probably what you're talking about.
Yeah, I have seen a little bit of Charlton. I do like him. I like his upside quite a bit. I like his versatility because I feel like he could play a number of different roles as he does at Michigan. Plays inside, plays outside, can play either side of the line, can stand up and be a rusher as well as put his hand in the dirt. So I feel like you have a guy that you could draft and develop and have some flexibility with how you sort of develop him and sort of how you fit him in with some of these other pass rushers the Falcons already also have. I think if there's one knock on Taco, he might be a little raw. His floor might be a little lower than some of these other pass rushers you could take, but I do think his ceiling is a little bit higher based off what I've seen than some of these other guys, like potentially a Carl Lawson or Derek Barnett or somebody like that. So, those are my thoughts on him. I will certainly, after the combine, I will, particularly with all these edges, depending on how they test, will determine sort of how much tape study I do on them after the combine, just because it'll sort of, the guys that test better will probably push themselves higher in the first round and be out of the Falcons' range, and the guys that tend to test a little bit worse might start slipping down into that late first round range where the Falcons might be, targeting them. So my suspicion is Taco's going to test well, and so he might wind up being a top 20 pick, but we'll see how that goes. Low-key Confucius at Jalen Muhammad asks, McDowell or Williams? I'm assuming he's talking about Tim Williams.
Man, I can't choose. Can I have both? Like, on the field, I want both of them because I feel like on the field you could do so much. Off the field, I don't know if that's worth it. That's the question that I have. I don't have the sources off the field to be like, yeah, take them, or no, don't. But on the field, with what they can do, give me McDowell over Williams for Aaron's reason of no 240-pound edge. No, but honestly, it's because I want to see a guy who can come in and really upgrade that strong side defensive end and base with someone who can actually pass rush, but can also play in the nickel and rush from either the edge or inside in the nickel. And I think if you've got that guy, it's Malik McDowell.
Fair enough. Yeah, look, I think Tim Williams is an excellent player. I just think the Falcons have one too many, they have one, but I think adding a second one would be one too many undersized edge rushers that you question whether or not they can play every down. Like I don't feel like the Falcons need to go out and get a guy like Tim Williams, who many question whether or not he can hold up full time in the NFL, and basically you're drafting Vic Beasley 2.0. Like my personal philosophy is you want all of your players on your roster, and that includes in your D-line rotation. You want them all to fill different niches. And to just basically get another Vic Beasley just to me doesn't make that much sense. Like if you're drafting a guy in the fourth round, that's fine. But, if you have Bruce Irvin on your team, you don't go out and draft the next Bruce Irvin. You go out and you draft the next Michael Bennett, or you draft the next, whoever. But someone else who fills a different niche. And I feel like Tim Williams fills too much of a similar niche as Vic Beasley on this roster, and that's one of the reasons why I don't want him. The off-field stuff I don't know enough about, but most of the stuff I've heard does not, indicate that, he's the world's greatest guy off the field. But, I haven't watched a lot of Malik McDowell. I see the raw athleticism and what I have seen from him. I never really sort of saw him as a great three technique based off of the limited film study I've done on him. But between these two guys, I'd go with McDowell. I do see the upside long-term with him a little bit more than with Tim Williams. But, I don't necessarily know if I'll watch more Malik McDowell, and I'll reserve the right to change my opinion about him. But at this point in time, like if we drafted him, he seems more like a 2 to 3 year project than a guy that's going to come in right away and be a home run hit or anything like that. But I wouldn't complain about it. Jalen S., who are we taking round 1 and why is it DeMarcus Walker? I know Dalen is being a little sarcastic because I know he's not a big fan of DeMarcus Walker.
I mean, who are we taking round 1? I don't know, man. There's so much talent in this draft. I mean, just looking at the edges, I see 7 guys who I would take in the first round. You know, Hassan Reddick, Charles Harris, Tack McKinley, Derek Barnett, Carl Lawson, Tim Williams. Myles Garrett didn't get into Atlanta's range, but any of those first 6 I listed might. And then at defensive line, Solomon Thomas, Malik McDowell, Taco Charlton, Jaleel Johnson, Caleb Brantley. I would take all those guys in the first round. At guard, I would go with Dan Feeney. At tight end, yeah, I know people don't want to draft a tight end in the first round. I get it. But if Atlanta goes out and gets, you know, Melvin Ingram and signs a couple guys who they like for the rotation at defensive tackle, I could see them saying, you know what, we're just going to take a tight end in the first round and go with David Njoku or O.J. Howard and get that playmaking kind of guy. Njoku's kind of like a let me see, what's the best comparison? I'd say like a Vernon Davis, and then O.J. Howard. Aaron might kill me for this comp, but I don't give a damn. I think he's got the potential to be the next Gronk. Like, he is that fucking talented, just naturally talented. Now, it's completely unrefined, but I do think a guy like Wade Harmon might be able to train him, considering Harmon's done pretty good with guys like Levine Toilolo and Austin Hooper and Jacob Tamme the last couple of years.
Yeah, you know, my suspicion who will take in round 1, I expect at this point in time we'll take a D lineman. I don't know if it's going to be an edge or a D tackle. Like right now, I'm sort of thinking if it's an edge, I think it's probably like someone like Barnett or Lawson. If I was to put money down on it, I don't expect it to be DeMarcus Walker, but he certainly will have his adherents come draft time, just because of his ability to play inside and outside, and people will make the lazy comparison between him and Michael Bennett. He is not Michael Bennett, but you know, people will make that comparison. As for D tackles, I haven't really studied enough of them, but it does seem like a guy like Brantley sort of fits in the mix there in that late first round range. Those would be my 3 bets at this point in time. It's still very early in the process, and it's a lot of shuffling that has to be done. In the meantime, I would be surprised if the Falcons went in at tight end or guard or any other position in the first round, just because I don't feel like they will have this sort of pressing. Like, whoever they take in the first round is going to be expected to contribute right away. And I don't feel like any of their other positions are going to be considered that pressing a need for them outside of the D line. So my suspicion is whatever position they don't address in free agency, and I expect them to address one of either the edge or D tackle in free agency, they will go after heavily with that first round pick in the draft. And it might be DeMarcus Walker, but I
don't think it'll be DeMarcus Walker. The one thing I'll say is Atlanta, under the Quinn era, has gone very highly into the are they athletically gifted range. Are they an athletically gifted person for their position? You know, maybe Keanu Neal may not have been the absolute most athletically gifted safety, but he's still one of the higher up safeties on the strong side. You know, at linebacker, at running back, guys like Tevin Coleman, Jalen Collins, they all fit an athletic profile that may be a little bit faster, bigger, quicker, whatever than what you're used to.
Yeah, no, I think that all makes sense. I don't have, I'm not good at sort of gauging who's going to test well, particularly on the D line as others are. But it wouldn't totally shock me if Walker tests better than I think people think he is, just because there's a little bit of that Jonathan Bullard to him, who tested way better than people thought. And I think most people would have agreed with watching him on film. They wouldn't have thought he was this premier athlete. And I think there's a chance that maybe Walker winds up being that, and that's why he might be in the mix in Atlanta. Not saying that I would draft him, but just saying it's a possibility. It's still very early. Derek Hunter at D-Rock the Party asks, if Poole moves to backup free safety, how many more 3 safety sets does Atlanta run? How different would his role be as a third safety versus the third corner?
I mean, it all depends on what they would do. They don't really run a lot of 3 safety sets now, and it might change in the future, but I don't see it changing if they get a guy like if they move Poole back there. I think if they get a guy like a Josh Harvey Clemens or an Obi Melifonwu or one of those guys, that's what's going to change it. As far as like running them just in general, they don't really run them that much to begin with.
Yeah, you're right. The closest thing that you would call a 3 safety set is sometimes when they would go 4 cornerbacks. They would move Olatoye around and put him in a spot in the middle of the field where he's sort of lining up like a safety, like a box safety, where he could cover the tight end or the slot receiver. I don't imagine that's how they would want to use Poole if they used him in that 3 safety set. I would imagine they would put Allen and Poole on the back end and then drop Keanu Neal into the box and use him like a linebacker. In their dime package. That would be what my expectation would be if they used that 3 safety set with Poole and Allen. My expectation is I think there's a decent chance. I won't say that there's a good chance, but I think there's a decent chance that we see Poole get a lot more reps at free safety next year. I feel like that's sort of mitigates some of the need to draft a safety. If you can move Poole back there and say he'll be our new Robinson Threezy, be the backup behind Allen at free safety, and then, whether it's Niesman or some mid-level free agent or some late-round pick, you can sort of, or Ishmael coming back, you can sort of figure out what you can do behind Neal at strong safety and be relatively solid there at the safety position. So, I think Poole's role as a third corner would probably be a little bit more deep responsibilities, but I don't expect us to see a lot of that next year. Luke at the Dirty Bird 1998 asks, would Sean Weatherspoon be a good fit at Sam linebacker in 2017, starter or backup?
I'd be okay with it. I don't think he's an awful football player anymore, but he's not what he used to be. So, I mean, I'd be okay with it. Bring him in, bring him back. I always bring him back, just for the leadership role. And I think he could handle it. I think he'd be able to rush off the edge. I think he'd be better than what Wheeler was.
No, I don't think this is a good fit for Witherspoon. Last year, he played almost exclusively at middle linebacker. We know he's more of a weak side linebacker. I think Sam is miscasting him. I think if you're going to bring him back, you're bringing him back to basically be the backup behind Deion Jones at middle linebacker, which I'm fine with. If you're trying to replace Wheeler at strong side linebacker, there are much better options than Sean Witherspoon out there, even cheaper options than Sean Witherspoon out there that actually fit that role, that are guys that are really good at setting a hard edge and can bring some pressure off the edge as well as pass rushers. One thing that we did see late in the season with Phillip Wheeler, and that this I think clearly is where the Falcons want to go with their strong side linebacker, is we saw Wheeler put his hand in the dirt at times during garbage time in some of the games down the stretch. We saw him do that a little bit in the training camp. Tyler Starr also did that as well. I feel like that's really where the Falcons want to go with that position, get somebody who's more in that Bruce Irvin role. That's one of the reasons why I think Vic Beasley might see a lot more time there next year. But in the meantime, I think they can find, guy off the street that can do that a little bit better than Sean Witherspoon.
I tend to agree. But I do think bringing him back, at least for depth there, isn't a bad idea.
Yeah, I think, I would say I like his depth at inside linebacker more so than the outside linebacker spot. But, I'm for bringing him back. Joseph 929 asks, what other needs are there other than D-line and right guard? I think we need a dynamic tight end like O.J. Howard.
I agree. Dynamic tight end, always a good idea. I'll never disagree with the idea of a dynamic tight end like O.J. Howard, because I think having a guy like him gives you a guy like Tony G when you get him developed, and that's more than worth it. Outside of tight end and right guard and defensive line and edge, free safety, at least competition for Ricardo Allen. I'm not saying Ricardo Allen needs to be replaced anymore, but I am saying that they do need to bring in some competition, especially when you've got a class as athletic and as talented as this one is. But I'll get more into that next year, and then or not next year, next week. And then I think outside of that, you're looking at depth pieces. You're looking at depth at linebacker. You're looking at depth at offensive tackle. You're looking at maybe a third running back, maybe a third, or maybe a receiver that can come in like an Isaiah McKenzie and, be that returner, be that special teams ace, be that guy who can come in and give you, another Taylor Gabriel type, while also being, that return upgrade, basically taking the role that Aldrick Robinson and the role that Eric Weems would have played, but filling it with one spot and opening you up to have another running back on the roster regularly as opposed to just two. Because almost every team in the NFL runs with three on their roster, and three active on game day. So that if a guy like Tevin Coleman goes, you can spend a pick on a guy who can do all the same things that Tevin Coleman and Devontae Freeman do. Like, I would be more than happy if they took a guy in this draft. They're like, yeah, this guy's kind of like a poor man's Devontae Freeman. I would be perfectly happy with that. Taking a guy in like the fourth or fifth or even seventh round that they feel like just adds depth. The Joe Yearbys of the world. Maybe even a TJ Logan out of North Carolina. Maybe even like Tyrene Folston. Joe Williams out of Utah, who's a little older, but what if that's the guy? Or even if they do go a little bit higher in the draft, maybe even a guy like a Corey Clement or a Donnell Pumphrey.
Okay. As far as Falcon needs, you need a backup quarterback. You need another tight end. You need to draft at least one offensive lineman, whether that's a tackle or guard, remains to be seen, but you definitely need to start developing for the future there. You need D-line help, as we said. You need depth at linebacker, and you probably need to add at least one backup safety if that's not Kamal Ishmael. Other than, those are the needs in terms of positions that they have to fill this offseason. Other positions are just sort of more luxury spots like running back, I think. You could add another wide receiver if a talented player sort of, slips in the draft, or, some really good player is a bargain bin guy. You could add another slot corner to sort of bolster the depth there, but those aren't necessarily needs. I agree that tight end is a position that you need to address I don't feel comfortable going into next season with Hooper, Perkins, and DJ Tilavea as the 3 tight ends. Now, whether that means you go out and you draft a tight end, that's a question that we talked about last week. I think it's the smartest move to do that, just because you have a deep tight end class. You can get a young athletic guy that can add something over the middle. It'll be an interesting development to see how Sarkisian is able to use tight ends over what Shanahan was able to get out of that group last year. I think for the most part, most of the tight end production last season was a byproduct of the Shanahan offense, more so than having individual players making individual plays, like guys just getting open on their own, as opposed to the scheme sort of opening opportunities for them. My hope is that with a year's development, guys like Hooper and Perkins will be better able to do those things. But at the same time, I think it would be a huge addition to the offense if you could go out and get one of these young tight ends on day 2 of the draft or so that can be that type of player. A guy like O.J. Howard has that sort of potential. There are several others in this draft class, and I'm sure we will talk about them in the coming weeks and or months in that regard. But I do think adding a dynamic tight end, ideally what you want a Jordan Reed type of player. Obviously that's easier said than done. Howard, I think, has that sort of potential in terms of being that guy that can sort of affect coverages and make teams have to adjust their coverages in a way that I don't think Hooper is ever going to be capable of doing. That doesn't mean I don't think Hooper's a good player, but I feel like he's more of a sort of a volume tight end, not sort of a matchup tight end. And I think if you can add that in this year's draft, that'll be a huge, huge addition to your offense, and will certainly mitigate any sort of issues that potentially come from losing your offensive coordinator in Kyle Shanahan. Vina Falcons, his question on the same note is: any chance Perkins has an inside track because of his history with Sarkisian?
I mean, maybe. It would be nice to see him actually have some sort of shot.
Yeah, I think the plan has always been, regardless of who was going to be calling plays, over Perkins to sort of compete for and be one of the front runners for that number 3 job. I don't think it was ever part of the Falcons' plan to sort of promote him all the way from the 4th tight end to the number 2 guy. I think they want a blocker to fill that, someone who's a little bit more reliable as a blocker. Right now, that would be Tilavea if the season started tomorrow. Toilolo would also be in the mix, and anybody else they might add this offseason. I think they'll probably want someone who can block a little bit better than Perkins can. But I do think the expectation has always been that Perkins was going to slot into that Tammy role as a wide receiver long term. And I do think his experience with Sarkisian certainly will give him probably a little bit more confidence with the new offensive coordinator, as opposed to if we had hired someone like Greg Knapp or whoever else who has no experience with Perkins. So it does give him a leg up, but I don't necessarily know if we're going to expect Josh Perkins to have like some 50 catch season in 2017 or something like that. Falcons Andy's question is: was Weems kept on returns because coaches knew the offense could drive 90 yards and didn't want to risk turnovers?
I wouldn't be shocked if that's why he was kept on returns. I'll put it that way.
Well, people may not like it, but their NFL coaches hate turnovers. And when you're a guy that career-wise, fumbles like less than 1% of the time, that's going to have value in the NFL. There's a reason why Brian Finneran, whenever back in the day, whenever we had injuries to our punt returner, they put Brian Finneran out there to fair catch the ball because they knew he would catch the ball. That has value in the NFL. Now, I know a lot of fans don't like that, and they want someone who's dynamic, who's a threat to take it to the house every time he touches the ball. But those players don't grow on trees. And at the end of the day, if your option is get a guy that is not going to muff the kick, and our offense is going to be capable of making up any sort of field position battle there is, like that's worth it. And you know, people act like Weems was this terrible returner. I think, you know, I'd have to look it up, but I know for most of the season he was in top 10, both in average yards per kickoff return and average yards per punt return. So it's not as if he was doing terrible at the job. Just people would get pissed off because of one dumb decision of him fielding a punt inside the 5 or whatever. But at the end of the day, it didn't really matter all that much. Okay, Marcus Lee 7478 asks, Falcons are Dallas like in roster pay, and you see them kicking salary down the line, which Falcon is going to be let go. Tough on the grammar, but I think I got the gist of the question.
But can you help me?
It sounds like he's saying that the Falcons are going to have a top-heavy salary roster, and you know, that's going to lead to somebody getting, you know, the short end of the stick or whatever that phrase is. Player is likely to be that guy, I guess.
I mean, I'm not seeing them having trouble with the cap anytime soon. If there are those guys, it's going to be guys like Brooks Reed and Tyson Jackson, maybe Adrian Claiborne. I mean, maybe down the road, Mohamed Sanu. Like looking at 2018, maybe Levitri, maybe Sanu are those guys. Maybe Derek Shelby. Maybe Robert Alford in 2019. Maybe, I mean, down the line, like there's not really any other deals. Like then you got Matt Ryan. Like in 2019, they have 15 players under contract, but it's Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, Mohamed Sanu, Austin Hooper, Schrader, Schweitzer, Mack, Shelby, Reed, Deion Jones, Devondre Campbell, Robert Alford. Like, that's what's under contract that year. Keanu Neal. Like, and they'll have $100+ million in cap space in 2019. Next year, they'll have $66 million in cap space. And if you get rid of Reed and Jackson, that goes up even more to like 75 or so. I don't see this team really having an issue with cap for the foreseeable future to where they're going to have to cut key contributors unless those key contributors have really fallen off the table. And that's when they're like, yeah, we'll cut them. But even then, the way Dimitroff has done his contracts, the way the cap's been rising, Atlanta's got the money to keep all these guys that they want to keep all the important pieces, to keep even some of the semi-important pieces. So I don't think there's an issue here. I think the Falcons will be fine on the cap. Even if people keep saying, oh, there's only 28 this year versus the 34 that I've got sitting here, I've got slightly different numbers because I'm reading into the contracts a little deeper, maybe, than like Aaron might be, or Aaron's just going to a site. And maybe the guy over the cap reads into him better than I do. Maybe I read into him better than he does. Who knows? I've just got slightly different numbers. It is what it is. I think the Falcons are going to be very well set for this year and the future. And assuming the salary cap is not the 170 I'm projecting, because I'm being conservative with my estimate, and it's closer to the 173, 174 that I'm seeing like reported in some places, I would be very happy because that's another $3 to $4 million to play with.
Okay. I'm pretty confident in my number of 28 at a 170 cap, but you know, we'll discuss that later. I'm sure we'll get the official number once the combine's over. But the way I will answer this question, I'm going to answer it as what player potentially might not get a second deal because the Falcons are spending their money elsewhere potentially, and they might have to let somebody that they would normally give a second deal to. I'll just limit it to next year's free agents, and I would probably put Devontae Freeman and Taylor Gabriel at the top of that list. Now, my suspicion is the Falcons will re-sign Devontae Freeman to a second contract. My suspicion is the Falcons will be in a position to re-sign Gabriel to a second contract. So I don't want anybody to interpret this as me saying neither of those guys are going to be Falcons come 2018. But I do think there's a possibility, depending on how each of those guys play this year, as well as other guys like Justin Hardy and Tevin Coleman, there's a decent possibility the Falcons let those guys walk as opposed to giving them the market level contract next year that most people sort of expect or think that they deserve. So that would be the possibility. But again, that really is heavily dependent on how those guys play and how other guys play this year. So, I don't necessarily think we've gotten to a situation anywhere close to what Dallas's roster is like, where they have like 8 guys with like market level deals. That could be the situation come 2019, 2020, potentially, after you see guys like Freeman or Jake Matthews and Trufant, Grady Jarrett, Vic Beasley, et cetera, get second contracts from the team. But I don't think that's going to be an issue for at least another 2 years. Okay. Evan Birchfield's next question is on a scale from 1 to 32, 1 being the most active and 32 being the least. How active do you think we will be in free agency?
I'm going to go with like 17.
Yeah, I'm going to go a little lower. It sounds like the Falcons are going to be more in that 23, 24 range. I think there's going to be a lot of people upset during that 3-day window of that legal tampering period that I think it begins on like March 7th, where, we see a whole lot of guys' names get connected to a lot of teams. And I think there will be a lot of players that the Falcon fans want that are hoping to be future Falcons that may or may not be connected to the Falcons. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of people in both of our mentions about why aren't we signing this guy and all that sort of thing. So I don't think the Falcons are going to be particularly that active at the outset of free agency. I think they'll do like what teams like the Packers and other teams have done, which is wait a couple of days to that first weekend and then sort of get the guys that aren't signing for the massive deals at the start. Okay. Jalen Muhammad's next question is, would you rather overpay for a player this year or wait for a rookie to develop mid-season?
I feel like I answered that before. I'd rather have a guy who's ready than a guy who may not be ready and needs more than just a year to finish up.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends. For me, my answer, always a caveat, but it depends on how much you're overpaying. Like, are we overpaying like Derek Shelby overpaying, or are we like Mohamed Sanu, Olivier Vernon overpaying for a guy? Like, it depends. Is it Paul Soliai overpaying? Is it Ray Edwards overpaying? I mean, yeah, like I'd much rather prefer the guy that can contribute immediately. And if I'm paying, a couple extra cents on a dollar, that's fine for me. But if it's like, if I got to pay $2 to get $1's return, then I'll just go with the rookie. Evan Birchfield's next question is, seeing what we need realistically, how many starters do you think we will get in the draft?
Realistically, 2. I'll say the first round and second round picks could possibly be starters. And I'd say the positions would be right guard. And this is at most. Right guard and defensive tackle.
Yeah, I would say 2 probably, just because I don't think you're going to have that many open spots available. You're looking at like right guard, potentially D tackle and D end. So I wouldn't expect the Falcons to go 3 for 3 in that situation. So 2. to pick two of those spots. Probably the D lineman, more so than the other ones. Evan's next question is: since we may not have DeMarco back, thoughts on someone like Tolbert who was released today?
If you can get him for cheap, do it.
No. Look, I like Mike Tolbert as a running back, but he's about 2 years past his prime. No, I would not sign Mike Tolbert to replace Patrick DeMarco. Go out and get someone who can actually block to replace Patrick DeMarco. That is not Mike Tolbert. He is a runner/receiver, not a fullback. Yeah, I haven't really looked at the free agent fullback class just because I'm like 96% sure the Falcons are going to keep DeMarco, but who knows? I've been wrong before. Jalen Muhammad's next question is: go on FanSpeak and run a simulation and tell me who you got. Not much of a question, more of a command, but sure, I'll do that in March.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I ain't doing that.
Jalen's next question is actually a legitimate question. How far have you all gotten in film watching, and anybody besides the usual hype guys you all want?
I mean, I'm pretty deep into it this year. Outside of the usual hype guys, I mean, the hype guys like Garrett and Williams and Lawson and Barnett and all those guys. Tayshawn Bauer from Louisiana State, I wouldn't be against. Samson Ekubom from Eastern Washington. Eddie Vanderdoes from California, Los Angeles. Tana Kopassignon. I probably fucked that name up. He's pretty fun to watch. At linebacker, Jalen Reeves-Maybin doesn't get enough love. He's excellent. He's a very good football player. Treston Decoud at cornerback/safety. I know Aaron doesn't like hearing that last name, but trust me, this one can actually stop the run.
I got no problem with the Decouds.
I just wish they learned how to fucking tackle. And then I'm going to throw a first-round name out there, Jabril Peppers. I mean, I know I'm going to sound crazy here, but if the Falcons get a couple guys in free agency on the defensive line and they're like, you know what, these are the guys, and they get a couple guys and say they trust that they're scouting for a second-round guy, I could see them saying, you know what, let's take Jabril Peppers, let's play him at free safety. Let's see what he can do back there. Let's make it work. Because I hate to say it, he's got everything they look for in a football player. He's a plus athlete. He's got by far one of the most athletic profiles in this draft for the position. And I mean, he's 6 foot tall, 205. He hits like a Mack truck. I'd love to see him back there with Neil, them being kind of like a Bash Brothers crew. And I think his issue with ball skills is really just that he can't catch for shit. He gets his hands on a lot of balls, and laugh if you want to for that comment.
I wasn't going to say anything, but since you gave me the excuse, I could do it.
Yeah, laugh if you want to on that comment. But he gets his hands on a lot of balls, knocks them away. He just can't fucking catch. You know who else can't fucking catch? He's one of our favorite players. He's one of everybody's favorite players. Desmond Trufant. Desmond Trufant can't catch for shit. But we all love him anyway. So I feel like if we got a Desmond Trufant version of a safety back there and he gets like 3 picks a year, no one's going to complain, especially with how hard he hits.
Okay. I don't know about the Peppers thing. someone convinced me that they were like, yeah, he's got some Landon Collins in him. You're going to just use him all over the place. And like, I'd be like, sure, but that's not really how the Falcons use their safeties other than Keanu Neal. And we already have Keanu Neal. So this doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But to answer Jalen's question, I have not gotten very far in my film study. I've just mainly watched the edges and I've seen just a couple of guys here and there. So I got nothing to answer this question. Sorry. Ask me again in a month or in 6 weeks. Evan Birchfield question is, what are your thoughts on the new coaching staff we have on the team?
Man, that's like an actually thoughtful, in-depth question. I feel like we went into this a little bit last week, or really a lot last week, just kind of reviewing what the coaches were and what they were doing and what their roles are. But I do like it as a whole. I think it fits well. I mean, Kyle Flood is a very solid offensive line guy. Former Rutgers head coach. Charlie Jackson as an offensive assistant. It's nice to see him get some more run. He went to one of the military academies. Wade Harmon at tight ends, you got to keep him. Sarkisian as offensive coordinator. I love the move. I've always been a Steve Sarkisian fan ever since he was up at Washington as a head coach. Saw what he did with guys like Bishop Sankey, who wound up being shit in the NFL. But, I mean, he did well with them. I'm so glad the Falcons have him. Bush Hamden is a very solid all-around quarterbacks coach. I don't know what Keith Carter would do as a running backs coach, just because I don't know what his experience is there. But Manuel is the coordinator for defense. Bryant Young, Ulbrich, Mallory, all those guys. I mean, I don't see any of those guys having an issue on defense. And then Jess Simpson, he's a former high school coach. I mean, the Falcons have guys who have head coaching experience on this coaching staff, but they also have a bunch of guys who have they're just a talented coaching staff. They know what they're doing. The one thing I'll say is, what the hell is going on with Jerome Henderson? Oh, I see his profile got added back. Never mind. Henderson's back with the team. So, Jerome Henderson ain't moving. My only question is, can Bryant Young really be this coach that I think he can be and just turn these guys into just savages up front? I think he's a way better coach than what Brian Cox was. I know Aaron's going to be like, oh, whatever, the unit improved because of Brian Cox, blah, 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 blah. But no, I totally think Bryant Young is a better coach. And I do think having Dwight Freeney made a huge difference this past year to have a mentor for those guys. Whether Aaron wants to agree with me or not, I think that had a massive difference there. Because there wasn't that veteran outside, beastly John Abraham type pass rusher. So
I'm just enjoying all the Aaron Freeman impressions you're giving each week on the show. But yeah, look, I like the coaching staff. I don't have a problem with it. I don't spend too much time thinking about the assistant coaches in terms of what they do. What I've looked up, it seems like they got a couple of guys from Quinn's past, guys that he's familiar with, that he's worked with before. So it's all good in my book. So I any sort of issues I had with Dan Quinn and his coaching hires were mostly mitigated this past season. He deserves the benefit of the doubt in terms of who he hires. So I'm going to assume in all cases that they're all going to be upgrades. I'm a little skeptical of the whether the offensive coordinator hire is going to be an upgrade just because Shanahan was so good this past season. But
it's still going to be a slight downgrade, but I think Sarkisian is a very I think you could do a shit ton worse than Steve Sarkisian out there.
Yeah, that was the point I was getting to. I don't want that to be construed as me thinking Sarkisian's bad or anything. I just, I just don't think it's reasonable to expect that you're going to hire a guy that's going to be better than what Shanahan did this past season. I know it didn't end quite on the note that people wanted it to end on, but I don't think there's any denying that he did a superb job, an A++ job for most of the 2016 until maybe the last 2 quarters, I guess. But yeah, so like I don't think it's fair to put those expectations on Sarkisian. That's more the main thing, not because I think he's a bad offensive coordinator. I just don't think it's right to expect him to come in year one and do the same thing. But I certainly think he's more than capable of doing a good job. All right, D-Rock the Party's next question is, do you have any thoughts on Danny Isidora, the right guard from Miami? Would he still be there at the end of the 3rd round?
I mean, I have no idea if he's going to be there at the end of the 3rd round. I don't think that he probably will be. I don't think he's that good in comparison to some of the other guys that are out there. He's probably my 8th guard or 9th guard in this class. And for what the Falcons do, he's probably my 6th or 7th. There's just a lot of talent in terms of the mid-round guys who you can get for pretty cheap. I'm not saying that they're going to be starters, but I see 4 guys who can start at guard in this class. Just period. That's with the Falcons, with anybody else, and that's Feeney, Lamb, Dorian Johnson, and Ethan Pochich. Those are the 4 guys that I see. That's it. Everybody else is a reserve, rotational, possibly competition type guy, but that's about it.
Yeah, I've only seen a little bit of Isidora. My brief glance at him was that he was not the world's best fit in our blocking scheme. But again, that was just the very briefest of glimpses. So I don't want to talk out of turn here, but based off of where sort of the consensus ranking is for him, I would be very surprised if he goes in the top 100. He seems like a solid sort of day 3, 5th round sort of guy in terms of where his ranking is. Maybe he comes out of the combine with some really strong testing numbers that sort of shift the narrative on him. But yeah, I don't expect him to be there at the end of the 3rd round. Typically, I don't know the numbers offhand, but off the top of my head, I think there's usually only about an average of 5 or 6 guards that are drafted in the first 3 rounds. And I don't see very many rankings that have Isidora or Isidora or whatever his name is in the consistently in the top 5 or 6 guys. So I wouldn't expect him to be there, drafted there. Last question comes from Uncle Disney. Yeah. How concerned are you about the Bucs next season? They look solid after the bye.
The Bucs? I ain't worried about the Bucs. I mean, the Falcons might split games with them next year, just like they did this year. But I think Atlanta's a better team than the Bucs, top to bottom. I think the Bucs have some legit issues on their offensive line. I think they have legit issues on their defensive line. I do think Mike Smith is the right defensive coordinator for them. But, Ayers is good, but he was fighting injury. Golston, can they keep – well, I'm not worried about them keeping guys. They got $60 million in cap, but I don't think their safeties are very good at all. Conti and McDougal, they're just not good. So I'm not too worried about the Bucs. It all depends on what happens in the end, where they actually do end up picking these guys up from, who ends up starting, who ends up there's still a long off season for them to be this force.
I have a little bit more concern over the Bucs than Scott does, especially when I heard the rumor today that Deshaun Jackson might sign with them. That scares the bejesus out of me. But I think the Bucs are an up and coming team. They're not by no means sort of this, dominant team. They still have several holes that they need to address. But I think, they have a good quarterback. They have a number 1 receiver. They have, the great J.R. Sweezy on their offensive line. So I think that mitigates any issues they have up front. They have a healthy run game. They have a talented front seven, and they have a up and coming secondary. So they have a playoff caliber team if everything goes right for them, and they can sort of plug in some other holes. And so, like, I think they are a team that if you're looking at this division, I do think the Bucs are a legitimate contender for the division crown. I expect Carolina to be better next year than what they were this past season, since they won't have any sort of illusions about what areas of the roster are problematic, like they were last year coming off the Super Bowl. You could make the argument the Falcons might be in that same scenario this offseason. We'll see. But I do think it's a 3-team race for the division crown next year. I certainly would put the Falcons at the head of that race. But, history sort of tells us that teams that lose the Super Bowl typically don't come back as strong as they are expected to do. So I do think if you're a Bucs fan or a Panthers fan, things are looking a little bit more up than probably certainly us Falcon fans might be willing to concede. Okay, I think that's it for the mailbag questions. We appreciate everybody that sent their questions in. As most of you know, you can use the hashtag Falcons Mailbag to get those questions to us. The show's Twitter handle, Falcons PFC, is a good way to hit us up. I am at FalcFans. Scott is at Karasik S. You can find this show and all of its archives on YouTube, as well as ProFootballCentral.com. Give us a like. Let's get us to subscribe on YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, all those things. And that will help more people find the show. And we will be back next week to talk about the linebackers, the cornerbacks, safeties, and special teams in our roster review. We'll pick up on any sort of news in the meantime as well. And we will answer you guys' mailbag questions as usual.